It's the 4th of July in the United States, and we as Americans are celebrating our Independence Day. And over the course of the past 6, 12, 18, it's been a while now, I've been reflecting more and more on where America stands globally vis-a-vis adversaries and allies alike. And I suspect this video may not get the level of engagement that I would hope that it would get, but I felt compelled to step in front of the camera today and provide a point of view, if you will, as someone who has lived abroad most of his life. Now, on the off chance that this video does go more broadly than I anticipate, allow me just to provide some background. I think it's important. My name is Peter Alexander. I've lived in China for the better part of 30 years. And more importantly, I've lived in China for more than half of my life now. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is I find that living in a separate country, in a country especially as unique and different as China, has allowed me the ability to view the United States from afar. And what I've discovered is an enormous number of different things. But there are 3 elements that I think are important to share today, along with how I envision and what my concerns are about where the country is heading. Number 1, by living in China for as long as I have, I've had the opportunity to sort of watch, if you will, the direction that the United States has moved over the course of that period. And what I mean by that is I still once, twice, 3 times a year travel back to the United States, either for business or to visit family. And I can tell you without any compunction that what we have witnessed over that period of time is an America that has lost a level of dynamism. Now, while I'm very well aware that we have the likes of NVIDIA and high tech and all of these great elements that are out there, certainly, it's at the lower base level, if you will. People don't take the same level of ambition that they would take. More people are concerned about risk. There's just this concern that I've witnessed over time at America pulling back, if you will, from that dynamic nature that made the country so great in my youth. The second point that I would want to raise is most of my conversations tend to be with people who are non-Americans, not just Chinese, but people throughout Asia, people from Europe, you name it. And the question that I have been increasingly asked is, what is going on? People who had historically viewed the United States as being an amazing place to go, an excitement, an open market, an open society, all of these things are now looking on not just America domestically. I'm not here to talk about that. It's really about America on the world stage. The word that I hear a lot more often is a country that is acting more and more like a bully. There's a lot of talk always about the international rules-based order, but it is very clear from the conversations that I've had, and again, increasingly over time, that the idea is that these are rules for thee and not for me. It's the reason particularly why I decided to title this video Hubris and Hypocrisy. Now, the third part, which I will get to later, is the issue of introspection, or rather lack thereof. But returning to the first 2 points before I do continue, there are ample examples and real world effects that are playing out given how it is that America and its leaders, bipartisan, Democrat, Republican alike, have been acting, and what this is meant and does mean moving forward. The best example that I give is with regard to the issue of Taiwan. And I'm not going to go into the whole gruesome details of this, but there has been considerable news and headlines over the course of the last 18 months discussing this, the need for America to protect democracy, so on and so forth, and that's fine. But at the same time, we see headlines when Russian frigates or submarines sail in and around or in fact harbor in Cuba. Or just the other day, the Wall Street Journal running a report talking about how there's increased spy capabilities by the Chinese in Cuba. And this has caused huge consternation in America. Now, last I looked, the Americans still operate the base in Guantanamo Bay, but that's neither here nor there. I'm trying to address the issue that looks at how American leadership looks at the concept of Cuba with the Russians and the Chinese versus how the Americans relate to Taiwan. Now, one is acceptable to the American leadership and the other is not. Now, I'm not here to necessarily weigh on, the geopolitical back and forth in this, but it is important to recognize that this, and it's only one issue I should mention, is critical because this is what the world sees. And there are real consequences to the actions that are being taken by the American diplomatic corps, foreign policy, if you will. Think about the relationship between China and Russia at this point in time. News coverage almost every day. For those of us that study history, though, we all know that for millennium, the Chinese and the Russians never trusted one another. Why would they be getting together now? Well, I could, be very flippant and say, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing, but it's beyond that. There's a recognition that American leadership has this desire, this foreign policy that is clinging desperately to a 20th century mindset of containment, and that anything that doesn't fall within the G7 or this rules-based order must be contained. That may have worked in the 20th century. It doesn't work anymore. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, consider that we have an entire new group that we label the Global South that has risen up in reaction to the foreign policy actions of the American leadership. We have things like BRICS, or this week we have the Shanghai Cooperative Organization meeting in Kazakhstan. These are the outcomes of America's policy. Now, again, these are just a few examples, and I expect we're going to see more of them come about. And by no means am I meant to be standing here discussing that countries like Russia and China and others have not had their own operations and their own agendas. Of course they do. I mean, most notably there is an adage/joke that says when China shows up at a country, say in Southeast Asia or Africa, they bring hospitals, they bring infrastructure, they bring railroads. When America shows up, they bring a lecture. Now, is China coming in with loans and infrastructure without any attachments? Of course not. But there's also not this lecture of how you should be running, what your governance system should be. And this continues and continues to weigh on how the American country really is being viewed internationally. And that's what brings me to the third point. And I think this is what needs to happen. It's not about something that is an idea or it's a recommendation. It's actually desperately needed. And that is introspection. I have seen zero introspection throughout any of the institutions throughout the United States. I see this with the media, especially when they have conversations about China. There's no real reporting as I see it that is genuinely objective. Mistakes have been made, and that's fine in reporting. But you need to go back and have the introspection to be able to ask yourself why, what went wrong, why did we make those mistakes? The same thing on policy. When policy errors are made, and they are made, you need to have the introspection to ask why. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here recommending that the American presidency or Congress or anybody in power in America needs to come out with a mea culpa that we made a mistake. I, in fact, disagree with that. That's not the same thing, though, as saying we need to look internally and we need to reassess. And I think we are at a point now, again, July 4th, what is it, 248 years since the independence of the United States. The United States needs to go back to the system that I remember in my youth, an open system, a system that wasn't afraid of itself, and be able to put out into the world two competing systems. You have the Chinese, the so-called autocratic system, or Russia or elsewhere, and then you have the free, open society that I remember and that I do not believe exists today, that was the United States. Create those two systems, get there through introspection, and then say to the world, we are here, we want you to make a choice, you have two very clear choices, and let's move on from there. Quite frankly, I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. But as much as I really have held my tongue on this, it has gotten to the point where I can no longer stand aside. There's a civic duty within me. I am a very proud American, but one that looks at how the United States is being viewed, that I believe very accurately by the global community, and it is not the United States of my youth. I have no idea how this video is going to land. I am always open to debate or have discussions with anybody who disagrees or has different counterpoints. I've made this point actually quite clear over the last 2 years. No one has taken me up on this. What is required is not a 20th century mindset. We need to move forward. America does still have the ability to be dynamic and needs to make those changes. For now, though, I thank you. Have a great 4th of July for those of you who celebrate. And for everybody else in the world, peace.